Welcome to the Understanding Boys podcast. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which this podcast is recorded, the Boonwurrung people of the Kulin Nation. We pay respects to leaders past, present and emerging. The Understanding Boys podcast is a series of conversations exploring what it is to be a good man these days. So if you had a story about being a good man and that you could tell a 14-year-old boy and he'd actually listen, what would that story be? And that's really what I'm asking our guests today. I'm Dr Ray Swann, and we're a community of teachers and parents concerned with the education and growth of boys in the modern world. The series is brought to you by Brighton Grammar, an all-boys school in Melbourne. To learn more about the podcast, please visit understandingboys.com.au. In our podcast today, we speak with Liz Dawes. Liz Dawes is the founder of the Robert Connor Dawes Foundation, which she founded after her son Connor tragically passed away from brain cancer in 2013. 6 years on, she's grown the charity to be the biggest paediatric brain cancer foundation in Australia. As CEO and chairwoman of the board, Liz now manages Connor's Run, the country's largest paediatric brain cancer event with over 4,000 participants. It has been crucial in lobbying the federal government to secure funding for a disease which kills more young people than any other form of cancer. Well, welcome Liz to the Understanding Boys podcast. It's great to have you here.
Thank you for inviting me, Ray.
One of the things I thought would be great for us to start on today is just a little bit about the work that you've been doing presently. There's been some really exciting announcements, some new research and funding, and we're talking a little bit earlier, and it seems to me that over the last 6 years there's been a tremendous amount of growth in the foundation. So perhaps we could start a little bit about what you're working on and what you're hoping to achieve this year in your work.
All right. Well, this has been a learning curve. When we started 6 years ago, we weren't really sure what we were doing and why we were doing it. It did feel like we wanted to do something, a way to honor Connor that felt important, that his afterlife could continue having a purpose. And I often think, Connor, of all the things he could have left me with as something to do, brain cancer, it's complicated. And it is complicated. So I'm certainly not one to say I'll ever understand the intricacies of the disease, but I feel I can help be a good advocate in the space. So bringing researchers together within Australia, within the world. I'm also early on, I made a commitment that we didn't want to just think of this as a disease that was affecting people in Australia. You can tell from my accent, we're American. But it is. It's a global disease. So there's work happening other places in the world, and how can we be a part of that? So that's been sort of an overarching big part for us, is to have a really good involvement, and we've done that. So we have, I used to have a lot of industry marketing experience before we had children and moved to Australia. One of the jobs I had was industry marketing. So that sort of has lent that self, that pediatric brain cancer is an industry, and there are people leading that industry globally. There are experts that people within the industry look up to. So, I went around and have met those experts and have actually brought them on as scientific advisors for our charity. And within Australia, there's some great work being done, and making sure that we know where that work's being done, who those people are doing it, how can we help. So that's been part of that as well. So what's happening is advocating. We have funded a $2 million research project in Australia, which is testing children's tumors. That's been really helpful doing that. And so the next stage of that is helping bring clinical trials. And so that was the big announcement that we just had announced with the federal government, investing in clinical trials for children with brain cancer. And we're really excited to be part of that. That was there was a lot of work going around in the background to bring the funders together, so collaborating. So it's the federal government, the Financial Markets for Children Foundation. Carrie Bickmore's group is putting in $400,000. We're putting in $1.25 million. Adding up to a $10 million investment for children.
Which is quite extraordinary. And I think a lot of our listeners may not realise that paediatric brain cancer is actually the number one disease, isn't it, for young people to suffer, which is extraordinary. an extraordinary and terrible thing to confront. And I imagine at the start of the work, it would have seemed quite overwhelming. How do I make a difference? What do I do? Where do I go? And where do I begin? And where did you begin?
I think we began, in the very beginning, and it was interesting. It was a teacher from Brighton Grammar was tutoring Nick in math, Andrew Burnell, who was teaching at Brighton Grammar, or the head of the junior school at the time. And after he tutored Nick, it was a week after Connor's funeral, and he said, "You need to have an event." And I thought, do we? and really sort of that post-funeral, now what? And his brother, Nick, who also went to Brighton Grammar, chimed in and said, we should do that training run that Connor did once. Right. And that was the impetus. That's what sort of created Connor's run. Connor ran from our house to the boat sheds, the mercantile boat sheds, training for rowing. Very uncharacteristic because he hated running. So that was an unusual event in our family. He actually was then diagnosed a few months later. I wonder if he was trying to shake, if he was starting
something off.
Yeah, and thought this might help. So that really was what started Connor's run. So we did that event. I have a phrase, productive grieving. Just get busy, and to focus on something helps me cope. And it felt like a really wonderful way to commemorate him, do something in his honor. And it's been incredible. Brighton Grammar has obviously been involved from the beginning of that event. After the first Connor's run, when the dust settled, I think we had $80,000. And that's when we started asking questions. Mm-hmm. So the community has come together, has helped us raise all this money. Our last event raised $1 million, which is extraordinary. And so now what are we? I felt a lot of responsibility that people were handing, they were taking part of an event to help do something for pediatric brain cancer. But at that time, we had no idea what we were going to do. So that took me off on a big investigation, asking lots of questions, meeting with lots of people. And the first thing we funded was, because it was easy to fund, it wasn't a huge thing, but was a PhD. So that felt really good for us.
And I guess it also brought in some further credibility and the links into the academic space. I'm just conscious as well, if some of our listeners haven't seen any of this, we'll include links at the bottom underneath this podcast for how you can access the website, and you can see the events, you can see video of people running, and more fun than run, I think, is what it's all about, and also some of the other amazing events that you put together. The 100-kilometre Ergo Challenge, which has also happened through another old Brighton boy, amongst others, Alex Douglas, over at his university in the States. He's at Syracuse,
I think. Syracuse. Yeah. And actually Andrew Maglio, going way back, was at Northeastern, and he helped with getting that event off the ground. And that's Connor's, just because we were new to all of this, it felt easier and natural to create our charity around things that felt genuine to Connor. So a run that he had done for rowing, a sport he loved. We, again, coming from the U.S., after that first Connor's run, our family and friends reached out and said, listen, we want to support, but can you set up your charity, the charity in the U.S.? Because then we can get a tax deduction. Right. And if we're set up in the U.S., there's obviously a lot of research happening in the U.S. That gives us some credibility back to the U.S. That's, in a way, has worked out really well. It's a point of distinction for us here in Australia. There aren't a lot of charities that are set up in multiple countries. And ours was a really natural thing for that to happen. But it's also given our family a nice natural connection back to our roots. And to have these American universities. It started with Wisconsin, where we're from, and Stanford. Connor had made an announcement that he was applying to both those schools for university, and he was going to get into
straight to the top.
Straight to the top. And we sort of laughed and chuckled. Obviously, brain cancer had other plans, and that derailed that progress for him. But I met with the Stanford rowing coach and the Wisconsin rowing coach, not knowing they had actually rowed together. And we're friends, which was very helpful. And to get them together on the water was going to be difficult. Stanford in California, Wisconsin in the Midwest. And so we came up with this virtual concept.
One of the things I find extraordinary, having participated in the runs over the years, is just the joy on the day. You know, you're running and there's people congratulating you and, you know, encouraging you, and you've got your statement on your bib about what you're going to do, and it's such a sense of youth and joy and celebration, and it would have taken a lot to, you know, I guess start that happening. But I'm also interested to hear, Liz, what have been some of the joining moments where other people have come in and perhaps brought something to the run or another part of your work that might have surprised you?
Well, the very first Connor's run, I reached out through a recommendation to David Hansen, who at the time was running Super Sprint. And I called him on the Friday, a week after Connor's funeral, on a Friday afternoon, to the business going, this is when we had sort of thought we might pursue this idea of a run. And I thought, well, he won't answer the phone because it's Friday afternoon, and I was still so sad and tired, and thought, well, I'll leave a message, and that felt safer because I actually wasn't sure what I was even going to ask him. And he answered. And their company reception. And now, you know, after knowing him, that was really unusual.
Yeah.
But the whole office had gone off for a run. He was basically heading out the door. The phone rang and he answered it. And he thought, what are you doing calling me a week after? I think he was we were both surprised. And I said, well, I don't know if you've heard of Connor Dawes. And he said, heard of Connor Dawes? I went to Brighton Grammar. My boys went to Brighton Grammar. I didn't know that. So there really, you know, he was incredibly generous with his time and talent, helping us navigate our way through creating this event. You know, again, totally outside our comfort zone. What we lacked for in expertise, we made up for in enthusiasm.
always a strength. Enthusiasm gets you a long way. Liz, I was wanting to ask you a little bit about having experienced probably the most difficult thing a parent could go through. How do you help your kids through that? You know, when you're experiencing something as difficult, where you are stripped completely down, how do you find ways to help your kids through those kinds of times?
So Connor was our eldest child, and he was diagnosed at 17. His brother Nick was 15, and his sister Hannah 13. I think those are all, as any parent listening knows, your teenage years are huge years for the person that is the teenager, and also for the parent of the teenager. Somebody said to me, your 2-year-olds are a precursor to your teenagers. And I thought, oh, my 2-year-olds were actually, they weren't too bad. They were pretty good. But teenagers was a whole new ball. You know, there was just a lot going on. From the very beginning, I was extremely honest with both Nick and Hannah. And the news obviously was, you know, you're hopeful and you're hopeful and you're hopeful. But as time is going on and things are happening, the reality of what Connor had is starting to set in. And I am the eternal optimist. And I feel like maybe that's even why I've helped create what we've created, is because I can't let Connor's story be a bad one. It just is foreign to how I can cope. But with his brother and sister, whatever we were hearing, I was very honest. And interesting, in retrospect, I would have them one-on-one, either in the car, you know, with your child next to you, or I'd say, come for a dog walk with me. And I just want to tell you about what is happening. I don't want you to hear it from anyone else. I want you to hear it from us. And I'm just going to tell you what we're hearing. I'm not making this up. I'm trying, you know, we're trying absolutely the very best of what we can do. But it's, you know, as time goes on, it's not looking great. And one of the doctors was really good. He said, listen, you don't need to come in for an MRI. You'll be able to tell. Is Connor walking through this door? Are you wheeling him in a wheelchair? Is he sleeping 18 hours a day? Is he, you know, the MRI can verify some of these things, but you'll know. And I thought that was good advice, because it was a slow unraveling. And that's the kind of conversations we were having with Nick and Hannah, was we can see it. We're with him every day. Mm-hmm. None of us wants this to happen. But how we help Connor through this is, all we can do is to love him. And that really was, it was an interesting time for our family because, again, we have teenagers. Time to start spreading your wings and start exploring the greater world, and you want them to do
And I
that.
guess they also take more risks
They
at
take
that
more risks.
time, which you would be incredibly risk averse.
Well, kind of, but you want them to have a normal childhood too. I was very careful, and maybe they also in their own mind knew that we were dealing with something pretty serious, and maybe they also didn't really need to venture afield. Nick maybe a little bit, but that's all normal. But we had this very close, intense time, and I think back on that, and I'm so grateful for it, that we had those 16 months after his surgery he really was recuperating that whole time. But really our family coming together, he had music therapy, which is something our charity offers. And we had a woman, Sarah Punch, still helping us, gorgeous, but she gave our family homework that we had to sing together with Connor. So there were often many Thursday, Friday nights that we would spend hours bringing up songs on the iPad and singing along. And that was a really joyous, happy memory for our family. But I think just being really honest with your children, sometimes what you have to say isn't something maybe that's easy to say. I think teenagers are pretty clued on, right? They're pretty switched on, and you've got to understand that. My parents went through a divorce when I was 15, and I remember thinking they have no idea how much I know what's going on. So maybe that was part of my memory, and I took that experience back into this experience with Connor.
You were saying earlier, Liz, about being productive, and that's been a really helpful strategy. We were again saying a little bit earlier off mic about the power of just the positive and thinking positively, and I've heard you speak about that before. Can you able to share with us and the listeners a little bit about your understanding of positivity and how that's been something that's been helpful in your own life?
For me, it's just a way that I can live with myself. I grew up, there was some negativity again within my upbringing, and I remembered coaches who were negative. I thought unreasonably so. I thought, why is this dark cloud following you around? The sun seemed to be following me around. And I know some of that, talking about mental health, some of it is outside of your control. I also do have those, I call them those cloudy days, those sort of mental health, where you are flat and you're down. I have them. And I don't like those days. So I fight to have, the metaphor, the sun coming out. I operate better in that environment. So I know that about myself. So whatever the situation is, I work really hard to get it to a place that feels positive, something that we can move forward from in a productive way. It just works better for me. I'd rather see the good in something than the bad in something. I'd rather get people coming together towards a cause than working, in isolation or saying, well, you can't, and you can't, something's not going to happen. And while I'm saying that, though, it is an interesting psychology when somebody lays down a gauntlet and says, well, that will never change. And for all my life, I've been that person to go, oh, okay, well, that sounds like a challenge. I'm going to take that on. So I don't know what that is. Sometimes that negativity almost spurs you on. Yeah. And in terms of renewal, on those cloudy days, you want the sun to come out, and sometimes it just doesn't. It starts raining, just almost mock you. How do you get renewal? Like, what are some of the things that you do? Is it still singing? Is it yoga? Is it, what are some of the things that bring joy in your life and help you to get that energy back? There are two things that I've always been a physical person. I swam competitively for 10 years. Scott and I have always enjoyed, biking together, skiing together. We've been outdoor people. But there are two things. Connor died it'll be 6 years in a few weeks. He loved to row. And through some friends at Brighton Grammar, some of the mothers of boys that rowed with Connor, we started taking rowing lessons. It actually felt spiritual. I don't know how to explain it, but instead of being a parent on the banks, we were in the boat having no idea what we were doing. But that coming together as a crew, that our sort of original group has disbanded, but I definitely have the bug, so I'm still on the Yarra every week. Connor's ashes are there, actually in front of Mercantile Boat Shed, spread by the boys from Brighton Grammar that were in the boat with him. That was a beautiful service. But to me, it's, the phone's in the car, it's a couple hours on the river. To me, that is really good for my mental health, but also is a really lovely connection to Connor, something that he loved. And the other is yoga. I had never done yoga, too busy running, biking, couldn't relax to do yoga. Connor did yoga, and it was incredibly good for him. So the music therapy and the yoga were two of his non-traditional, treatment isn't the right word, but things that he did through his brain cancer journey that resonated with our family. And the yoga was unbelievably powerful for him. And I started that after he passed away. And it has become a really strong, it's something that I get a lot out of. And I feel a really strong connection to him. So those are just two examples of things that are ways that I'm connecting with him, but also recalibrating myself.
And it's amazing what creates meaning, isn't it? Rowing and being, at Princess Bridge and just being there, and just there's a kind of a knowing there's another layer of experience potentially that you are partaking in. So that's a wonderful, wonderful story, and I guess we encourage people, don't we, to find that in themselves, whatever that is.
Well, and also,
or where that is.
I didn't start either of those two things until I was after 50. But so the message there is, to get into a boat is nerve-wracking. And, you can tip over. It's cold in the water. But to get over that and then to be able to do it, and same with yoga. Yoga's a bit exposing as well. Some people there are very, very good at what they're doing. And I don't know, you're kind of in this meditative. It was a place I wasn't comfortable because I'm a really busy person. So to know that I needed that, or I was willing to at least try it to see, could I sort of understand how Connor felt, because he loved both of those so much. So I feel like that's been both of those things have been a real gift to me.
Well, James Gertzman, the PE teacher here, he has a saying which I love, which is the magic happens outside the comfort zone, which I love.
Oh, well, then I'm living well outside it, because everything I'm doing, I feel is outside my comfort zone. 100%.
Liz, we have two questions that we ask everyone on the podcast, and the first one is about what does it take to be a good man these days? What does it mean to be a good man these days? The current climate that we live in, and we see examples of men behaving poorly all the time, and yet we know just how powerful and how important it is for young men in particular to have a vision of where they want to go. And tell us, what are your thoughts on the vision of what it is to be a good man?
I'm reflecting back when Connor and Nick were little, but some of the things that I would say to them is never lose sight of your, not your feminine side, but your never lose sight of the non-boy side of you. That those things that make you sweet or kind, that's what makes you special. It was interesting when Connor was unwell. He came back to Brighton Grammar. So he was, his friends had just started year 12. He was not, after his surgery, in any way set to do that. He had lost his short-term memory, couldn't move his right side. But we brought him to school twice a week, I think Tuesday afternoons and Fridays. He sat in Mr. Little's further math class. But the boys, the way they took care of Connor, the way they nurtured him, the way they loved him, was something really, really special, really beautiful. And I thought teenage boys don't often get a chance to show their nurturing side. They don't often get a chance to, unless they have a wonderful family pet like we do, and they can, it was just seeing those boys Some weren't comfortable, and I get that because it was confronting. He was obviously very, very unwell. But for those boys that were comfortable, the love and support, it was a really beautiful thing to see. So I'm all about boys, sure, go out and, do all that. But at the end of the day, to just be, that sweet, kind, it's okay. It's good to have that.
Yeah. And you need it for yourself, don't you? I mean, I was listening to a speaker speaking recently just about self-compassion and just how important it is just to be kind to yourself and kind to others as well, and how that creates space and renewal again for oneself, and certainly seeing that in young men is very powerful. Our last question today, Liz, is about a story or a message. If you had one that you could give a boy of 14 or so and he'd actually listen, what would the story be?
So Connor, when he was at Brighton Grammar, terrible procrastinator, waited until the last second for everything, which drove me insane. So he had a project that I think he had either, stalled, procrastinated. So I was upset with him, and we were driving to school and driving him down New Street. And I felt like I was being pretty hard on him about setting timing and doing things so you don't leave it to the last minute. I felt like he was just sort of withdrawing as I was trying to espouse all this motherly wisdom, and I could see he was just sort of tuning me out. So we pulled up to New Street and he got out of the car, and I just didn't want to leave him early in the morning with that. And so I looked at him and I said, Connor, I'm only saying this because I love you. And without missing a beat, he looked at me and he said, well, then stop loving me so much. So advice to teenage boys is everybody comes at things from their own perspectives, but just don't forget that your mom and dad are coming from their own perspectives as well. So I guess maybe if boys can, parents are trying to be well-intentioned, but we're not perfect either. And we're just sort of finding our way through this parenting journey with them.
It's a beautiful story and wonderful advice. Liz Dawes, it's been so great having you here on the podcast today. I can't help but be struck by your amazing views and your incredible passion and enthusiasm for the work you do, for the way in which you continue to honour and create a legacy for Connor is extraordinary. And as someone who's in this community and has, as I said earlier, participated in the joy of being in the run or following along with the work that you're doing, I can only say how incredible it is for us. And again, just to offer you my thanks for being here and sharing your story today.
Well, thank you. And can I also thank Brighton Grammar for being part of the journey? We moved here when Connor was 5. He started prep at Brighton Grammar, and he went to the school until he couldn't, until he went through year 12. So 13 years he was at this school of his 18 years of life. And Brighton Grammar is really wound into who he was. So, and the school has continued that relationship with us, which I find incredibly special. It's a really important part of who we are.
Liz Dawes, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ray.
Make sure you subscribe on your podcast app, and please leave us a review to help grow the community. For more information about the podcast, visit understandingboys.com.au. Until next time, thanks for listening.